Segment and interim reporting. This is part 1, and it covers just segment reporting. Now, what is required of a large corporation is if they have many divisions doing all kinds of things, we have to separate out because they know that internally you separate them out. And so we have to first determine if the segment meets a certain criteria. And then we have a set of some tests that will indicate whether, even though it is a segment, whether we actually have to report that information separately on the financial statements. Now, first, we've got to determine what is an operating segment. Well, first of all, it has to engage in business activities from which it earns revenue and incurs expense. So therefore, a cost center would not be a segment. Whose operating results are regularly reviewed by chief operating decision makers, and for which discrete financial information is available. And with the advent of computers, we all know that we keep track of everything. Now, FASB statement number 14 says that what we need to do is for domestic and international operations, we have to disclose the revenue, operating profit or loss, and identifiable assets based on going through this test process. Now, we can combine segments, even though they meet the criteria, if the nature of the product or service provided by each operating segment are the same. I give you an example would be like a Nordstrom's having multiple stores. They would not have to show all the stores separately. Nature of the production process, these have to be the same, the type or class of customer, and the distribution methods, and the nature of the regulatory environment. So an example would be if we had a Nordstrom's, say in England, we probably would have to show that separately because the regulatory environment would be different, even though we had met all the other criteria for combining. Now, here is the test for determining if a segment is reportable. Does its revenues, including intercompany, are they 10% or more of the combined intercompany and external sales? 2. Now, they only have to meet one of these tests. If they don't meet the first one and don't meet this one, which is its profit or loss, and it's the absolute number. So it doesn't matter whether they had a $100,000 profit or a $100,000 loss. If that's the 10% or more, then you have to include it. Okay? And that also includes intersegment or intercompany sales, but we always exclude allocations. Okay, and the last test is the assets are 10% or more of the combined assets of all segments. So all you have to do is pass one of those 3 tests, and you will be included. You will have to be shown separately, and then we have one more test after we go through this. Again, we satisfy one test, but then what we do is we add up all the outside sales of the reportable segments and make sure they equal 75% or more of the total outside sales. Just a reminder, after applying the 10% revenue net income and asset test, we must also add all of these up that we have identified as reportable. And what we need to do is make sure that we only include outside sales revenues. They must equal 75% or more. They must equal or exceed 75% of the total company's outside sales. And we keep reporting them until we equal this amount. And remember, we do not include outside sales. And firms are advised not to disclose more than 10 segments. Now let's take a look at an example. We have Danny Corporation. They have the following departments: books, computers, maps, travel, and finance. And they do report revenue and expenses, and they have assets. And so we're going to have to look at them. So the first thing to remember is we exclude any allocated costs. So these we would ignore as part of doing our test for net income. So what are the combined revenue, including intersegment? So we would add all of these up, take it times 10%, and in this case, anything that is greater than 221,200, we're going to have to report separately. So according to this, we would have to report computers, maps, and travel. So we know no matter what happens on the next two tests, we're going to have to report those separately because they passed one of the three tests. Now let's do the second test, and we're going to look at the combined absolute value, whether it's a profit or loss, and we're going to see if we have to include them based on looking at net income. So we would take the total revenues from our last schedule, subtract out our expenses, take it times 10%, and it says anything that has an absolute value, which is whether it's a profit or loss, must be reported separately if it's 27.9 or above. So based on that, we would now do computers, maps, travel, and now we would add finance. Now we're going to look at 10% of the combined assets. In this case, we take it times 10%, and we know that anything above 339.8, and so computers and finance would be included, but we haven't added the only one we're not recording, which is books, so we know that we have to report, based on the three tests, computers, maps, travel, and finance. But we still have one more test we have to go through. Now, that is, we need to look to see if the outside sales of computers, maps, travel, and finance is equal to or greater than 75% of the total outside sales. So, we know total outside sales are 1644. So we're going to add these up, the ones we have to report, and we get 1463. We divide by our total of 1644, and we get 89%, which exceeds our 75%, so we don't have to separate anymore. Now, the other thing that we have to show separately is major customers. Now, we do not have to show their names, but we do have to show that a breakout of a specific company getting 10% or more of our sales. So here is an example. We have these four segments: apples, orange, pears, and peaches. And again, when we do this test, we only look at outside sales. So in that case, we take the total outside sales of 376 times 10%, and that means any of the units that have more than 37,600 and outside sales need to be shown separately, and in this case we would have to show them all separately because they all exceed that number. And that concludes segment reporting.